Well, hello, and continuing on with the urinary system, we're going to talk about how the renal tubule helps control the concentration level in whatever is in urine, as it says here, the regulation of urine. So in this, we had talked about three things that happen. We have the glomerular filtration, which we talked about earlier, and then tubular reabsorption and tubular secretion. These two are the ones we'll talk about in this video. Now, so really it's dividing everything that happens on this side, all right? Because this area, the glomerulus, is where glomerular filtration is going to happen. Now, as this filtrate is going to be produced, there's going to be a couple of things that are going to happen. Obviously, since we did talk about how there's going to be, on average 180 liters of fluid get filtered through here, and that we only, in general, are going to, urinate out about 1 liter, that means that the majority of this is going to be pulled back from the tubule back into the circulation by way of the peritubular capillaries. Right? But then there's certain things that haven't gotten filtered in here and that need to be pushed out. And some of it is things that have even been reabsorbed, but we need to get it out because we can't have too high of a level. And it's going to be pushed out of the, again, the peritubular capillaries into the tubule, and that is called tubular secretion. So these are the two movements we look at: tubular reabsorption, which is where we're going to pull back things that have been filtered back into circulation, and then tubular secretion, where things that are in circulation we're going to push into the tubule. Now the next slide is going to have a bigger picture of this, and we'll talk a little bit more about it. So in this slide, this little area, as it says here, is the nephron loop. So this is the proximal convoluted tubule. This represents the distal convoluted tubule. This arrow is the descending limb. This kind of shows the ascending limb of this thing called the nephron loop. So those are the parts of it. In this, we're not going to get too in-depth in the parts of it necessarily. We're just going to talk about the tubular reabsorption and tubular secretion on this model so you can see it a little better. Again, this orange represents glomerular filtration. That is making this fluid that's in here. This is called the filtrate. And so this filtrate is going to have a lot of water and a lot of different things, and a lot of things that we want to take back, like glucose. And so, for instance, the glucose gets filtered as it goes through this proximal convoluted tubule. It's going to be pulled back into this peritubular capillary because we don't want to get rid of it. That is called tubular reabsorption, this guy right here, right? Then we will have things that, like we'll look at here in a little bit, potassium. We can't have potassium get too high in our bloodstream. Remember, potassium is a very important ion on the inside of cells. Remember in 210 when you looked at the nervous system, how the electrical wave that we call an action potential is a dance basically between sodium and potassium. Sodium's on the outside of cells, potassium is on the inside. So if we accumulate too much potassium in the interstitial fluid, that's going to throw that off. So we're constantly trying to get rid of potassium. It usually happens over here in the distal convoluted tubule, as we'll see in a minute, but it's going to be in circulation and then get pushed out into the filtrate. And again, that particular thing is called tubular secretion. So those are the two parts that are going on. Now, tubular reabsorption is going to happen by a couple of different methods. Now, I'm not going to get too involved in this. We need to know osmosis for sure. Really, most of the water, and osmosis is all about water, but water in general is going to move. So if I have, this is going to be the filtrate, and I wish I could change the color, but I'm going to try and, I can't draw it that well here. This thicker line is going to represent the peritubular capillary bed. So as water is in here, H2O, there's going to be a lot of the water. It's going to be a very dilute system, because I have a lot of water, and in the bloodstream, most of the water's been pulled out. So this is very concentrated in here. This is very dilute. And when you put two things like that together, because water wants to move from dilute to concentrated to try and even things out, because concentrated actually means that there's not a lot of water in it. So water is going to be pulled out by way of osmosis. So that's going to be part of tubular reabsorption. But the other one is called active transport that we looked at right here. Active transport, like we looked at back in 210, just means that I'm going to have little ion channels that are going to be controlled by either ATP, right? Because active means energy cost, or it could be ions like hydrogen or sodium, or some of them that we will see that are used that help open and close this to move things across. And again, as it says, usually active transport is moving substances against their concentration gradient, which means it's going to be pushing things from high concentration to low concentration. So if I have 100 things of sodium on this side and only 10 over here, in diffusion, what would happen is these would cross the line, whatever this little line is, and it would even out. But in active transport, it's saying, all right, I still need to get rid of some of these, so I'm pushing it against the concentration gradient. So that's what's going on there. So this active transport helps form urine, helps remove substances that are being filtered out that we don't want to lose. Like, for instance, glucose is the big one. A lot of times we can't avoid it, but a lot of times we don't want to get rid of amino acids. Lactic acid, which is simply glucose. It just needs to have oxygen put into it. So there's a lot of different things. Again, glucose is the main one that I'd want you to know. Now, always, whenever you hear glucose, remember we're talking about carbs. All right. Carbs are our source of energy. Glucose, if we get rid of glucose, generally that's a sign of a problem like diabetes, right? I'm not worried about endocytosis on this, but that's tubular reabsorption. Now, when we talk about tubular reabsorption, it is going to, water is going to be a big part of it. Most of the water is going to be reabsorbed passively, as it says here, by osmosis, because again, right after that, efferent arteriole leaves the glomerulus and turns into the peritubular capillary bed, because it has lost most of the plasma, it is going to be very concentrated in there. And right away, when it hugs that proximal convoluted tubule and that filtrate, which is mainly water, it is just going to be like a big magnet to suck water across. Now, the other thing is, along here, we're going to have active transport that's going to be pumping sodium ions back into the peritubular capillary bed. And when that happens, as it says here, the sodium ions, as they are reabsorbed, and some of it is passively, whatever, but as they're reabsorbed, just like a little magnet, the little negative ions are going to be pulled along with it. And so that's a pretty important thing. And again, most of them are things that we're going to need. Now, again, the proximal convoluted tubule is really the main driver of most of these things. Proximal convoluted tubules, where all of the basic things that are always going to be done are done. The nephron loop, as we kind of talked about earlier in one of the previous videos, is all about controlling the volume, not necessarily the concentration, but the volume of the urine. And then the distal convoluted tubules, where our body makes changes for homeostasis. For if our pH gets one way or the other, it'll dump. If we become too acidic and go into acidosis, the distal convoluted tubule is going to start trying to get rid of hydrogen ions. If we are low on calcium and our body is trying to conserve calcium, the distal convoluted tubule will be on the lookout for any calcium ions in the urine and try and pull them back across. So the distal convoluted tubule is kind of the fine tuning. I hope that makes sense. But proximal convoluted tubule reabsorbs about 70% of all of the filtered sodium and water along with the other ions. And this is just a general statement. 99% of the filtrate is going to be reabsorbed each day. Most of the things that get filtered out in the glomerulus get reabsorbed. All right. So again, this kind of shows the different ones between water and sodium. Now, this picture, I think they could have done a little better job. Of course, again, not a big deal. This is the little layer. This is the filtrate that's showing as it's going through here. Some sodium, first of all, is going to be reabsorbed by active transport. We're going to have cells that are going to be pumping it out back into the circulatory system. We're going to have some of it that's just simply going to be moved back by passive movement. And because of this, bicarbonate ions, which we've looked at in several different things, again, remember HCO3, that bicarbonate ion is going to be reabsorbed because it's going to follow the charge, negative, and it's a negatively charged ion. Sodium's a positively charged ion, so as sodium moves across, this is going to follow it along. Same thing with this chloride. So chloride is going to be kind of moving along with sodium. And then water, of course, is going to be mainly done by osmosis, but there's going to be some pumping it across as well as following sodium. Sodium's kind of like the star of the show in a lot of ways. Sodium is the movie star, and all the negative ions are like the paparazzis kind of follow them around. I don't know if that worked out well, but hopefully that makes sense. Now, tubular secretion, right? So these are things that are in the peritubular capillary bed, as it says here, and they need to be pushed out into the renal tubule to get rid of. And so tubular secretion is going to be how our body really will affect homeostasis for sure. These substances generally are waste, and they need to be gotten rid of. The active transport mechanism function in the tubular is the mechanisms which tubular secretion uses, because it's going to pick and choose what it wants to get rid of. And so different things like certain drugs and ions, but the main ion we're going to kind of pick on is this potassium. Like I said, potassium is the main ion inside of cells, an intercellular ion. And if it gets too much in the extracellular fluid, we can cause real big problems. Also, our body, our kidneys will use this tubular secretion to help regulate pH by getting rid of hydrogen ions. So it's trying to get rid of this. And there's a big pressure on this. And we've talked about this multiple times. Your respiratory system is going to help regulate pH simply by the getting rid of or holding on to carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide acts as an acid in our body. But the respiratory system works hand in hand with the urinary system to help regulate pH. And the urinary system goes straight to the source, the hydrogen ions, and it gets rid of them to help regulate it. So that's tubular secretion. And so this is going to kind of just point out that at the distal convoluted tubule, tubular secretion's really playing a big role. It's all along, but it's in the proximal as well a little bit, but it really is the distal convoluted tubule that's going to be used. And again, it's going to for potassium, it really is going to be sodium that's going to be the trigger. So as the body will start pumping sodium back in or pulling it back in, this will cause almost a turnstile effect to get rid of the potassium, as potassium concentrations are going to get elevated in this paratubular capillary bed. I'm going to have these little ion channels that will function as, again, kind of like a turnstile or one of those revolving doors. As the potassium increases in concentration, these things are going to pull it, it's going to attach it, and then this little revolving door is going to pull a sodium, and so they're going to pump each other in the different direction and get rid of the potassium. Now, this is the last slide on this, the regulation of urine concentration and volume. We're going to talk about this in another, much more in depth in another section, but concentration. Remember, the concentration of something, if I had two little vials here next to each other, and then one of them, and we'll say that each of them have about the same amount of fluid, and in one of them I have a lot of ions all in it floating around, and in the other one just a few. The one with the more ions is concentrated, the one without is dilute. And I can also take this dilute one, and if I add more water to it without any more, sorry, I shouldn't have said it that way. I was thinking about something else, but let me rephrase that. If I take this dilute one and I remove water, so like if I'm boiling something and I'm removing water and I get it down, I can get it down where the same concentration as the one over here, just simply removing the water but allowing the solutes to stay in it. And what I was kind of thinking of is I could also do it with this one, the concentrated one. If I add more water to it or fluid to it, but I don't increase any of the solutes in there, I can end up I can work it to have the same concentration. And this is how our body is using the kidneys and to filter, but also to regulate the concentration of urine. So if I'm drinking a lot of fluid, I'm going to have very clear dilute urine. But like, let's say I'm sleeping and my body is trying to shut down or limit the volume of the urine I produce so I don't wake up all the time to go to the bathroom. My urine is going to be very concentrated because I'm going to try to not have I still want to filter all the bad things, but I don't want to have as much water in it. So that's kind of the yin and yang as it's going back and forth on that. Now, hormones such as aldosterone and then these cardiac nitritic peptides, we talked about that. The main one really is the atrial nitritic peptide. These two are opposite each other. Aldosterone is going to conserve water, which means I'm going to make more concentrated urine. Nitritic peptides from the heart are going to be trying to get rid of water. They're saying that I've got too much volume in my circulatory system, so it's going to make a much more dilute urine. Now, the ability of the kidneys to maintain an internal environment depends mainly on their ability to concentrate urine by reabsorbing large volumes of water. So if I am absorbing more water than normal, I'm going to produce a much more concentrated urine. If I am trying to get rid of more water than normal, I'm going to make a more dilute urine. So the distal convoluted tubule and the collecting ducts are impermeable to water in the absence of the antidiuretic hormone. Remember, antidiuretic hormone means no peeing. So antidiuretic hormone is all about reabsorbing water. So if it's not present, water is impermeable on the distal convoluted tubule and the collecting duct. So water is going to be excreted as dilute urine. I hope that's making sense. I wish I was able to be in front of y'all to see what you're see the expression on your face so I can tell if you're getting that. Because it's really simple, but it's a complicated explanation. So if antidiuretic hormone is present, these areas are going to be permeable to water. And it's kind of weird. I know this book doesn't really say it, but they're called aquapores. Antidiuretic hormone opens up aquapores, water little holes. And so the water will leak out and is reabsorbed by osmosis into the interstitial fluid in that little the renal medulla area. And so when this happens, urine becomes very concentrated because it is pulling the water out, but the solutes aren't leaving. Now, also, we talked about these nephrons, the two nephrons, the cortical versus the juxtamedullary nephrons. And the juxtamedullary nephrons are so important in the regulation of water absorption because their little nephron loops extend way down into the medulla. And so the medulla is very hypertonic, which means that there's not a lot of water in there. And remember, so it's going to pull that water. It's going to have a big magnetic draw to pull that water out. And so it's going to help make a very concentrated urine. I'll try to do another video to explain this a little better, hopefully. But I hope you got it.